Good afternoon, everybody. We will start our session, and it's a real honor for me to moderate this discussion with the human rights lawyer, Oleksandra Matviichuk, who founded in 2007 the NGO Ukraine Center for Civil Liberties. In 2014, the CCL launched Euromaidan SOS initiative that was getting hundreds of reports from people who had been beaten, tortured or persecuted on fabricated charges. The same year, Oleksandra, your organization was the first human rights organization to send mobile group to Crimea and to Donbass, where Russian so-called green men started appearing. Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, the center is documenting Russian war crime. Your mobile group worked in liberated regions, and your database counts, you said me just before our session, 56,000 of records describing atrocities committed. And you set up the Tribunal for Putin initiative. Last year you got a Nobel Peace Prize for your outstanding work, prize that you shared with two other organizations from Russia and from Belarus. You personally were named one of the most influential women by Financial Times. I would like to start with a set of questions on your work and on your organization. You document every war crime. You believe that every victim has the right to justice. 20 months since the beginning of the full-scale war, what crimes during the war does the organization work with? Are your priorities and your main challenges still the same? Did the Nobel Prize facilitate your work? Do you have more researchers or more capacities of action? Because Ukrainian people now know you better and you have a larger international audience.
Thank you very much for these questions, and I'm very grateful for the audience. It's a huge honor for me to address to you. I'm Ukrainian human rights lawyers, which means that I have been documenting war crimes for 9 years and using the law in order to defend people and human dignity. But now I and other Ukrainian human rights defenders in situation when the law doesn't work, because Russian troops destroying residential buildings, schools, churches, museums and hospitals. They attacking evacuation corridors. They torturing people in filtration camps. They ban Ukrainian language and Ukrainian culture. They forcibly deporting Ukrainian children to Russia. They are abducting, robbing, raping and killing civilians in the occupied territories, and the entire UN system of peace and security can't stop such Russian atrocities. And this led us to very difficult reflection, because the main question which I as a human rights lawyer ask myself, how we can protect people in 21st century, their lives, their freedom, and their dignity. Can we rely on the law, or does just brutal force matter? And this question is important not just for Ukrainians, or for people in Syria, or for people in Iran, Sudan, or Myanmar. The answer to this question will define our common future. And this is a real reason for such state of affairs, because you asked me about Nobel Peace Prize. For decades, the voices of human rights defenders from our part of the world wasn't heard. Maybe we was heard in some premises like UN Human Rights Committee or OEC Human Dimension meetings, but not in the rooms where political decisions were taking place. Because for decades we told that country who persecute their own journalists, killed activists, and disperse peaceful demonstrations, such country are a threat not just to their own citizens, but to the entire world. For decades, Russia committed horrible war crimes in Chechnya, Moldova, Georgia, Mali, Syria, Libya, other countries of the world, and they have never been punished. They start to believe they can do whatever they wanted. And now, with this large-scale invasion and Nobel Peace Prize and everything which is going on around, finally, we have our voice heard that peace and human rights are inextricably linked, that we have to base our political decision not just on economical benefits, security issue, or geopolitical interests, but on human rights and values.
It remember me Andrei Sakharov position. They said the same, that human rights and peace are really directly linked. Oleksandra, how do you manage to track what happens in occupied Ukrainian territories?
Maybe I will start with my own experience, because since 2014, our main focus was illegal practice of detention, torture, sexual violence, and killing civilians in the occupied territories. And I personally interviewed hundreds of people who survived Russian captivity. And they told me horrible stories, how they were beaten, raped, packed into wooden boxes, electrically shocked through their genitalia, and their nails were torn away, their nails were drilled, they were compelled to write with their own blood. One woman told me how her eyes was dug out with a spoon. So, to be very honest, we are documenting not just violations of Geneva and Hague Conventions. We documenting human pain. Now we face with enormous amount of it. And we do it in different methods. We gather testimonies of victims and witnesses. We analyze open data with a further verification. We sent mobile groups to liberated territories. We created all Ukrainian networks of local documentators and cover the whole country, including the occupied territories. And I think that this is probably the most documented war in the human history. But we do it not just for national archives, not just for memory. I have a huge respect to the work of historians, but we are human rights lawyers. We document these crimes that sooner or later, all Russians who committed these crimes by their own hands, as well as Putin, top political leadership and high military command of Russian state, will be brought to justice.
May I ask you a personal question? How you and your team cope psychologically with this flood of story of suffering, rape, violence? How do you protect yourself in order to stay strong and to continue to help other people?
It's not an easy question to answer, because there is no universal answer. I'm still lacking a proper word to describe what does it mean to live during the large-scale war. Because war probably is the most horrible thing which can happen in human life. To live during the large-scale war means that everything which you call normal life and take for granted, possibility to go to work, to visit your friends, to have family dinner, to hug your beloved ones, it suddenly disappeared. To live during the large-scale war, it means to start the morning here in Paris with checking a messenger. What happened during this night in Kiev and in other cities? And this is a ritual which millions of Ukrainians are doing, because even if your native city wasn't shelled by Russian rocket this night, it doesn't mean that other Ukrainian cities hasn't been shelled that night. To live during the large-scale war means that you lost the whole control over your life. You can't plan not just your day, but your next several hours, because you have no idea when the air alarm started or internet has disappeared. And to live during the large-scale war means that you live in total fear for your beloved ones. A huge amount of people joined Ukraine armed forces. like former journalists, bakers, designers, IT specialists, steel workers, like people from peaceful professions, joined Ukraine armed forces to defend their children, peaceful democratic future. And how to cope with all this? I think for me personally, two things matter. First is a goal. I imagine Putin in The Hague, and this drives me. I want to see him in The Hague. I know that I will use my best dress with red lipstick, and I came here as a victorious. And second, the examples of ordinary people who start to do extraordinary things. You remember, in February last year, when large-scale invasion started, not just Putin, but frankly speaking, France and other democratic countries, they were totally aware that Ukraine can't resist. Because Russia is so huge, enormous power. Russia was 11th economy in the world. Russia had a much huge military potential and much bigger population. How you can resist to such country as Russia is? And we witnessed how international organizations evacuated their personnel. But ordinary people remained. And it were ordinary people who helped to survive under artillery's fires. It were ordinary people who took people out from the ruined cities. It were ordinary people who broke through the encirclement to provide humanitarian aid. It were ordinary people who risked their life to save others who they never met before. And suddenly, it's become obvious that ordinary people who fight for their freedom and their human dignity is much more stronger than even the second army in the world. And this is a real inspiration.
In some interviews that I read, you explained that Russian military cruelty is its main arm in the war, in order to break the will of people to resist. And this arm, as you said, was used in Chechnya, in Syria, in Georgia, and remained without punishment. That is why the repetition again is possible in Ukraine. Can we realistically hope the justice for the perpetrators of war crime if they are from a permanent member of United Nations Security Council and a nuclear power? What changes to international law and to international systems does it imply? Is the International Criminal Court's arrest warrant against Putin enough to ensure justice?
Hope is not a strategy. We have to do our best, everything which we can, to break the circle of impunity which Russia enjoyed for decades. Not just for Ukrainians, not just for people from other countries who have already suffered from Russian war crimes, but also in order to prevent a new Russian attack to a next nation. And this is our historical responsibility, because all this hell which we now face in Ukraine is the result of total impunity, which have a long-lasting tradition. Remember, after the Second World War, when the world was shocked with disaster, with millions of deaths, with total destruction of countries, the world started to do decisive action. The UN system was launched, the start of European Union was launched, the Nuremberg trials was launched, and this slogan, which united the whole democratic nations who commemorate this horror, was never again. But when Nazi war criminals were tried on Nuremberg trials, Soviet totalitarian Gulag was never condemned or punished. And that is why unpunished evil grows. And we have break the circle of impunity, and in order to do it, I'm sure that we have to change our way of thinking, because law allows us, laws even oblige us to prosecute Putin and his surrounding for the crime of aggression, for that fact that they initiate, plan, and they start this war, which lead and resulted in numerous atrocities which we're now documenting. The problem is that people who take decisions, they still look to the world through the lens of the Nuremberg trials, where Nazi war criminals were tried, but only after Nazi regime had collapsed. But we live in a new century. Justice shouldn't be dependent on how and when the war ends. We cannot wait. We must establish special tribunal on aggression now and hold Putin, Lukashenko, and their surrounding accountable.
Thank you very much, Oleksandra. Last year, you shared the Nobel Peace Prize with Russian Human Rights Center Memorial and Oleg Beletsky, a Belarusian pro-democracy activist and prisoner of conscience from the Vesna Human Rights Center. There were many critical voices and objections in Ukraine against this shared prize, because putting on the same level the aggressors and the victim, it seems to be not the right thing. But it seems to me that you were not on the exactly same critical way. Do you cooperate with your Russian and Belarusian colleagues, human rights defenders, especially on the case probably of Ukrainian in Russia, and on case of deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia?
Let me use this opportunity to describe why this news received a critique from the part of Ukrainian society. Because when Ukrainians see Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, it's automatically linked to the Soviet Union myth about sisters nations. And everybody, even during Soviet Union, know that it's a huge lie. There is no sisters nations. There is only one nation who dominate, only one language who dominate, only one culture who dominate. And especially during the war, when Russia and Belarus became a country's aggressors, it was very painful to see these three countries together. But what we try to explain, that Nobel Peace Prize is not devoted to countries. It's devoted to people. And if we want to do the link with the Soviet times, it's better to make a link with dissidents movement. When dissidents from different countries fighting together with a common evil who try to dominate in their part of the region, when they build invisible for their society ties to protect people in situation when the law doesn't work, when they have this motto, for your and our freedom. And yes, we closely cooperate with Russian human rights defenders before the war started in February 2014, and more intense after the war started in February 2014, and even more harder when the large-scale invasion started in February 2022, because we have thousands of illegally detained civilians in Russia. And for us, the only possibility how to do at least something for them, it's our brave Russian human rights colleagues. And I'm extremely grateful for them. But the problem is that our Russian human rights colleagues are just a tiny minority in Russia. Majority of Russian people, unfortunately, supported this war. And the roots is in culture, because Putin governed the country not just with repressions and censorship, but with a special social contract, which is based on so-called Russian glory. And the problem is that a majority of Russians still see their glory in forcible restoration of Russian empire. This means that only success of Ukraine and military defeat of Russia in Ukraine will provide a chance for democratic future of Russia itself, a chance to reflect this imperialist culture and to think maybe it's not okay in 21st century to invade other countries, to kill their people, to erode their identity.
Thank you very much, Oleksandra. You said human rights are not devoted to one country. Another side of the medal, and sorry for the question, but do you collect information about the war crimes committed by Ukrainian soldiers too? Do you track the situation with Russian prisoners in Ukraine?
Sure. When we document human rights violations, we document human rights violations regardless of the sites. And that is why I can clearly assure you that the vast majority of episodes which we collected, and you mentioned on the beginning, we have 56,000 episodes, so the vast majority was done by Russian side. And this is understandable because Russia uses war crimes as the methods of warfare. Russia instrumentalized the pain. They deliberately provide enormous suffering to civilians. This is the way how Russia tried to break people's resistance and occupy the country. Maybe you remember these photos and videos from Bucha when dead bodies lay scattered around the streets until their liberation. We immediately sent in April our mobile group there, and we found the same dead bodies in gardens of their own households. We found the same dead bodies in mass graves, men, women, children with their hands tied under their back. We found the same dead bodies in civilians' cars who tried to, like the whole family tried to escape from this dangerous zone and were deliberately shot by Russians. There is no legitimate purpose in doing this. And there is no military necessity. Russians have done such horrible things only because they could.
Thank you very much, Oleksandra. I would like to ask another set of questions, more global this time, about war, about Ukrainians' future. In a recent article in The Economist, the Commander-in-Chief, General Zaluzhny, qualified this situation at the front today as a strategic stalemate. What is the mood today in Ukrainian society? Are the army and the society still ready to fight until the end? Do they feel probably some fatigue to go to the trench? And some of last publications in Western press let appear disagreement among your elites. Is there still the national sacred union behind the President Zelensky?
We have no other choice. This war has a genocidal character. And Ukrainians want peace much more than anyone else. But peace doesn't come when a country which was invaded stops fighting. That's not peace. That's occupation. And occupation is horrible. It's just another form of the war. I know what I'm talking about because I have been documenting war crimes for 9 years. And I know that people in occupation live in a gray zone. They have no possibilities how to protect their lives, their freedom, their property, and their beloved ones. The story of Volodymyr Vakulenko is a bright illustration. Volodymyr Vakulenko was a children's writer. During the Russian occupation of Kharkiv region, he was disappeared. His family hoped to the last that he is alive, and like thousands of other Ukrainian civilians, just in Russian captivity. But when Ukrainian army liberated Kharkiv region, we found mass graves with dead bodies of civilians there. And in the grave under number 319, it was a body of children's writer Volodymyr Vakulenko. Volodymyr Vakulenko wrote beautiful stories for children. Entire generations of Ukrainian children brought up on his Daidy's book. For what Russians kill children writer? The simple answer, because they can, and this is not a peace. Peace means a possibility to live without fear of violence and have long-term perspective. And we have no moral rights to leave our people alone for torture and death under Russian occupation. And that is why the voice of politicians who propose us so-called peace, which means that Ukraine has to satisfy imperialist appetites of Russia in order to stop this war. Such voices and such claims is not just wrong, because Putin will not stop. They are immoral. Ukrainians are fighting not just for territories. We're fighting for our people there.
Thank you very much, Oleksandra. There will be elections next year in the United States, and we see in polls that the support among Republicans for Ukraine has fallen sharply since February 2022. In Europe, the new president of Slovakia declared a suspension of arms supplies to Ukraine. We know the pro-Russian stance of Hungary. And many other countries, we can observe a kind of fatigue with this war. And some started to call to negotiate, to push Ukraine to negotiate with Russia, even if the result can be the loss of territories. Are you disappointed with this evolution? Do you feel the lack of Western support? And because we are in Paris, how do you assess the France's role in supporting Ukraine?
Thank you very much for this question. Maybe I will focus on three important points. First, let's remind how this war started. This war started not in February 2022. This war started in February 2014, when Ukraine obtained a chance for the quick democratic transition after the collapse of the authoritarian regime due to Revolution of Dignity. And in order to stop us on this way, Russia started this war, occupied Crimea, part of Lugansk and Donetsk regions, and last year extended this war to the large-scale invasion. Because Putin is not afraid of NATO. Putin is afraid of the idea of freedom. And with this war, Putin tries not just to punish Ukrainians for our democratic choice, which we made 9 years ago. He also tried to convince the whole world that democracy, rule of law, and human rights are fake values, because they couldn't protect anyone during the war. Putin tried to convince that a state with a strong military potential and nuclear weapons can break international order, can dictate its rules to entire international community, and even forcibly change the internationally recognized borders. And if Russia succeeds, it will encourage other authoritarian leaders in the world to do the same. And because international system of peace and security is not working, we can find ourselves in a world which will be dangerous for everyone, without any exceptions. So, returning to a question, if someone have fatigue of this situation or bored with the situation, let's help Ukraine to win fast and to stop the situation. Because when large-scale invasion started, the civilized world told, let's help Ukraine not to fail. And Ukraine obtained first weapons to be able to defend ourselves, and first real sanctions against Russia were introduced into force. But this is a time to change this narrative to another one. Let's help Ukraine to win. There is a huge differences between let's help Ukraine not to fail and let's help Ukraine to win fast. And we can practically measure these differences in types of weapons, in gravity of sanctions, and speed of decisions. So if someone bored with the situation, help us to change this narrative, help us win, because democracy must win wars. Only spread of freedom make our world safer.
Unfortunately, our session is taken to the finish, dear Oleksandra. I would like to thank you not only for your intervention, but for your work, for your engagement, for your passion. Allow me to express our admiration for your personal courage and the outstanding work of your team. Thank you very much.